Well, thank you very much. Thank you to Sue for inviting me and the organising committee for inviting me. And thank you to you for staying for the last session. And what I'd like to do with this session is send you away with some new thoughts and ideas for yourselves. We spent a lot of time today talking about how to improve care for women. But I think it's also important that we care for ourselves. And I'm getting a lot of feedback from midwives who are perhaps a little burnt out, to say the least, and they're looking for alternative ways of getting back the passion. So I'd like to pose a couple of questions for you. I don't expect you to put your hands in the air, but just a couple of rhetorical questions. Would you like to do what you're passionate about, or get back to doing what you're passionate about in caring for women, pregnant women, maybe birthing women and new mums, and actually doing it in a way that is the way that you came into midwifery to do it, so that you feel fulfilled, and that fulfillment is then transferred over to the care of the women and provides them with a sense of satisfaction and enjoyment for their childbearing experience. Would you like to be able to provide services that are perhaps not usually part of the NHS? Would you like to look at doing something different with the women that you're working with? Would you like to get a better work-life balance? How many of us are pretty tired for whatever reason? We know that being a midwife is fun and rewarding, but very, very tiring and very difficult. We're going through difficult times. So would you like to be able to do something where you're in control of the work that you're doing? Would you like to be able to be your own boss and do it in the way that you want to do? This isn't me. This is, as you may recognise, the midwives from Call the Midwife. And I was talking with Catherine Guthridge this morning, and we were talking about her comment about not quite being one of those on a bike. I think I'm of the same era, and I actually was on a bike for a while. In fact, when I was a midwifery lecturer, in those days we all had responsibility for our own set of students, apart from the 3 months that they spent on the community. And we had a community midwifery tutor who I shared an office with for a while. And all the student midwives had Macs and hats, and they rode bikes. That's the way it was done in southeast London in the 80s, early 80s. But the community tutor spent more time looking for the bike pumps and the lost hats than she did in actually teaching them, I think. But it was very frustrating at the time. I trained as a nurse first, because that's what you did in those days, in the middle 70s, and went straight into midwifery. I'd wanted to be a midwife since I was 15. I actually wanted to be a community midwife since I was 15. Don't know why. There was nobody in my family that did anything medical at all. But I trained as a nurse, and I went straight into midwifery afterwards, and thoroughly enjoyed it, and then went on the community for a while. Fairly quickly, I discovered that I wanted to go into teaching, and I've been in teaching for a long time, as Sue was mentioning. I was a lecturer, or tutor as we were in those days, in southeast London, and worked as a midwifery lecturer, obviously training midwives. But I was able to go on a massage course. Again, I can't remember why I did it, but I did decide to do a massage course. And I came back into my work, and I was teaching the students how to use bits of massage. And I was in the right place at the right time. I was doing this at a time when complementary therapies were becoming far more popular with the general public. So I decided to go and do a reflex zone therapy course, which is a German clinical style of reflexology. I just had my son, and I was back at work. He was about 5 or 6 months old, and I was back at work breastfeeding morning and evening, and rushing in the loo at lunchtime to express, as you do. And whilst I was on the reflex zone therapy course, I started to produce more milk again, as if I was third day postnatal. And I said to the lecturer, what's going on? You know, why have I suddenly started producing more breast milk again? She said, well, if you remember yesterday, we were working on the reflexology points of the feet that correspond to the endocrine glands. And your partner that you were working with has just slightly overstimulated everything, and you started sprouting milk again. So I thought, oh, this is really interesting. And I began to look at how complementary therapies could then be applied to midwifery practice. The following year, we moved, nursing and midwifery education moved into the higher education sector, the university sector. And once you get into the university sector as a lecturer, you are encouraged to develop areas of interest and expertise. So I decided to go on an aromatherapy course, which was really not very good, actually. The tutor was a lovely lady. She was probably an extremely good therapist, but she couldn't teach very well. So I ended up, and as several of us did, teaching myself, but was able then to go back to the University of Greenwich, as it was now, to develop a course for nurses and midwives wanting to explore this growing field of complementary therapies. And that eventually led to first a diploma of higher education, then a BSc honours degree in complementary therapies, which I ran for a long time, about 14 years. During that time, as part of my clinical commitment as a lecturer, I set up a clinic in southeast London at one of the units used by the student midwives, offering complementary therapies, not for relaxation, it was for very specific things. Women had to be referred to the clinic, and it was a teaching clinic. And that clinic ran for 10 years, once a week, every Monday, except for high days and holidays. During which time I personally treated over 5,000 women with a range of different therapies. I'd gone on to learn other therapies and combined them together. Now, I'm not telling you this to blow my own trumpet. I'm telling you it because I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time and actually develop what was a fairly unique field of expertise at that time. So I became a specialist in midwifery complementary therapies. I was involved in research. I've written quite a lot of books and journal papers, and obviously teaching and conferences and this sort of thing. But towards the end of the early 2000s, I actually became quite burnt out. I was running around like an idiot, sort of working. And I'd had for a while an idea about setting up a company for offering complementary therapy education for midwives. So at the end of 2004, I left the University of Greenwich and set up Expectancy. I think it was probably the scariest thing I have ever done. To go from a principal lecturer salary, which was pretty good, to nothing, makes you very hungry, and certainly provides you with the motivation to succeed. They say in business that if you can manage the first 3 years, you've succeeded. I still sometimes find 12 years later, I feel as if I am playing at being in business because there's still a lot to learn, but I certainly wouldn't go back either to the university sector or the NHS full-time. It's hard, but it's been extremely rewarding. We now provide a whole range of courses on complementary therapies for midwives, and we have a licensed consultancy system, which is a sort of franchise system for midwives who want to provide complementary therapies for pregnancy in private practice. I also last year set up another company called Expect Business Support, which provides business support for people going into business, particularly those making the transition from the NHS to the commercial world. Now, obviously during these years that have gone on, things have changed quite a lot. And where we are now with the NHS, of course, is that money is this, we've got to save money all over the place. And cost savings mean that non-essential or apparently non-essential services are obviously being reduced and in some cases actually abandoned. But conversely, the NHS is increasingly keen to contract private services. So, I'm not talking here about the ethical issue of whether people pay for services or not. That may not sit comfortably with everybody, but there is a place for some private services. And of course, you probably know that women are out there, they want choices, and they are actually prepared to pay for some of the things that they want. A lot of women are going to hypnobirthing classes, for example. Most of those are currently private. The other thing is, as I've already mentioned, midwives are increasingly feeling overworked and undervalued. And whilst I don't want to be negative, it is causing people to think in a different way about what they want from their work experience. So what sort of things could you do in private practice? You may decide to perhaps go down to part-time in the NHS and do some private work in something that you're really keen to do but haven't been able to do in the NHS. You might want to offer antenatal classes, hypnobirthing classes. You might want to do complementary therapies. You could perhaps offer one-to-one pregnancy coaching or enhanced antenatal and postnatal care. Women will pay for these services. Some women will pay to have an extra, more leisurely examination of their new baby than they might get in the hospital setting. Tongue-tie division. If you're a mother with a baby with tongue-tie and you've got a 3-week waiting list in the NHS, it's going to affect the success of your breastfeeding. And women will pay for somebody to come and just do the frenulotomy, and they can then pursue successful breastfeeding. There are other things that you can do. Bereavement counselling, miscarriage support, postnatal depression, infant massage, run classes or one-to-one, and breastfeeding support. You might go into freelance consultancy or teaching, as I have done, or of course you could go into independent midwifery. And some people find that quite scary, but others relish the challenge. So, have you got what it takes? You've got to have passion, you've got to have a vision about what you want to do, and you've got to be committed to it. You've got to want to be your own boss. If you prefer the protection of an institutional, of an organisation like the NHS, then perhaps it's not for you. But if you're thinking, yes, I could do this, then maybe this is something that you could have some thought about. They say you've got to have an outgoing personality, but I do know people in business who perhaps are not as outgoing as I might be and are still doing it extremely successfully. You've got to be self-motivated and have the creativity to change and go with the flow a bit. But the nice thing about being in your own business is you can change it overnight. You don't have to go through 27 committees to discuss whether it's cost-effective or safe or whatever. You can make those changes in your own business and actually rise to the challenge. You do have to have stamina and emotional resilience. It's jolly hard work. But as I said earlier, I wouldn't go back. I think you've also got to be able to take the knocks. I remember being very upset not long after I started because a midwifery lecturer actually said to me that I couldn't possibly be as good a midwifery lecturer because I was now private. But actually, when you're working for yourself, you have to be as good as you possibly can be, otherwise you don't get the business. I think sometimes people say things and don't quite understand what it's like on the other side. And you have to have a variety of good communication skills the skills that are required for business. But you already have many of those skills. Many of the things that you do as midwives are transferable into other areas. And certainly they're transferable to help you set up in business or in private practice. You're good leaders, you're good organisers. That's the nature of the work that we do. If we weren't organised, we'd be in a complete mess. You're good at customer relations. You're perfectly capable of making a very good relationship with a mother the minute she walks in the door in labour if you haven't met her before. You've got negotiation skills. Think about the conversations that you have with colleagues, medical colleagues and others. And you've got the IT skills. You've got to have numeracy skills because you're busy calculating drugs. You might not have accountancy skills, but you can learn those. And some of the other things that you might need in business are fairly easily learned and added on to the skills you've already got. And sales and marketing skills, probably one of the hardest things actually, but you can learn those too. Now, if you did decide to work privately, full-time or part-time, what can you expect to earn? I've taken a London fee for some of these examples and an out-of-London fee. But if you were to do antenatal classes with 4 couples per class and you only did 10 courses in a year, less than 1 a month, you might actually earn between £8,000 and £16,000 a year doing that. If you do tongue-tie division, frenulotomy, midwives in our area in South East London will charge £150 and parents will pay it. And if you did 2 of those a week, if you saw 2 clients a week for 45 weeks of the year, you could earn up to £13,500. If you do one-to-one consultancy, perhaps the figures are even greater, maybe as high as £48,000. And we're now getting into figures that are probably higher than some of you are currently earning. Complementary therapies. You could do relaxation therapies and expect to earn anything in excess of £10,000. Or you could offer specialist services like moxibustion for breech or complementary therapies for women who are overdue and don't want to have labour-induced. You might make £15,000 from that. And of course, if you go into independent midwifery and maybe you have 12 clients a year at £4,000 per client, which is the average in London, then you could be earning £48,000. And that sounds quite healthy, really. I think even if you didn't work full-time in private practice, there's still the opportunity to make some extra money and do what you enjoy doing. Obviously, if you do decide to go into private practice or set up your own business, there are certain things you've got to look at in terms of the legalities. First and foremost, you're a Nursing and Midwifery Council registrant, and you have to work hard at maintaining your registration and notifying your intention to practice. You've got to be very clear about which hat you're wearing. Are you being a midwife or are you being something else? And that is perhaps one of the most difficult aspects. We spend a lot of time with our licensed consultants talking about, which bit goes where. You have to get to grips with Her Majesty's Revenue and Custom, the old Inland Revenue as was, and all the red tape. And every time I get an envelope coming through the door with HMRC on, I think I'm going to be fined for not doing something I was supposed to have done, but usually it's okay. You have to, if you're going to set up a company, you have to incorporate that company with Companies House. And you've got to know the rules and regulations. For example, you can't use the word midwife or midwifery in a company title unless you have got from Companies House a certificate of no objection. That's because the title of midwife or the word midwife or midwifery and also nurse and nursing are statutorily protected titles, so you have to ask for special permission. And of course, you've got to have appropriate professional indemnity insurance cover for the work that you're doing. And that can work out quite expensive, but if you don't have it, not only is it not protecting you and the women, it's also illegal, of course, now. So it's really important that you plan carefully. It's important that you acknowledge the limitations when you first start and you don't overcommit. If you think, oh, I want to offer all these services and then you can't deliver those services, you will not get any credibility for what you're doing. You've got to allocate enough time and money to setting up the business and planning it carefully so that you don't make mistakes. Professionally presented leaflets and websites and things. If you do a trawl through a lot of websites, including those that offer health-related services, you will see all sorts of grammatical and typographical errors, and it doesn't say very much about your professionalism. Don't undersell yourself. Value what you've done. Value those years of training and experience and expertise that you've developed. That's what people are paying you for. And you are worth it. You know, it's a bit like the L'Oreal advert. You are worth it, and you have to value yourselves. And I think that also is quite difficult because we're going through a phase where a lot of midwives don't feel as valued as they should be. You possibly might need to do some other training, either in the particular services you're going to offer or in business skills. Accountancy, for example, you're probably going to have an accountant, but you might need to learn basic bookkeeping. And it's really important to invest in yourself. I wish I had had a business coach or somebody I could talk things through with when I first set up. And I did make quite a few mistakes. The most expensive mistake, I think, was fairly soon after we started, and I had a team working with me. We decided to exhibit at the baby show in London. And then I also decided we would exhibit at the complementary and alternative medicine show in London. What I made the mistake of doing was not realizing they were both on the same weekend. So we had to have 2 of everything in order to set up our stand. We were not in any way prepared. I spent the entire weekend running between Olympia in West London and Excel in East London, leaving other people to do all the business. And we were told that you got 6,000 people at one exhibition, I think that was the baby show, and 4,000 people at the CAM show. So that's a total of 10,000. And I decided that we would have some expectancy little bags made up. So I had 10,000 bags printed. And 12 years later, I'm still using them. And, you know, it was simple things like that. You don't need to fill 10,000 bags. And I think if I had had the help at the beginning, then probably I wouldn't have made that quite expensive and very silly mistake, really. But you know, you have to plan, and you have to value yourself. You have to set your prices right, and you have to feel comfortable with what you're doing. So if you'd like less stress, less pulling your hair out or collapsing in a heap when you go home from work, and you'd like more sitting on the beach, having a glass of wine, or enjoying yourself doing things in the evening, then maybe you might like to think about working for yourself. You can set up in private practice, or you can go beyond that and set up in business. And I was talking to 2 people in the exhibition today. I'm afraid I can't remember the name of their company, but they're doing quality monitoring of maternity services. One is a midwife, one is a nurse. And they've just started, and it was fascinating to talk to them about their journey through the first year of their business. So you can do it, but you might just need a little bit of help. Thank you very much.